The studio lights were already hot when the tension began to simmer, the kind of heat that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with anticipation. Denzel Washington sat across from Piers Morgan, posture relaxed but alert, hands folded loosely in his lap. From the outside, it looked like another polished late-night interview, two well-known figures trading words under the glow of cameras, smiles rehearsed, laughter cued on schedule. But beneath the surface, something restless was stirring. The audience could feel it in the pauses between sentences, in the way Piers leaned forward just a little too eagerly, in how Denzel's eyes narrowed for half a second before smoothing back into calm. The interview had started warmly enough. Piers praised Denzel's latest project, calling it powerful, timely, and impossible to ignore. Denzel responded with humility, crediting the cast, the director, the long hours of unseen work that made the final product shine. His voice was steady, rich with experience, carrying the weight of a man who had spent decades navigating rooms just like this one. The audience laughed when expected, applauded when cued. Everything felt controlled, balanced, safe. Then the questions shifted. Piers adjusted his notes, tapping them lightly against the desk as if signaling a change in tone. His smile sharpened. "You've always been very vocal about responsibility," he said, eyes locked on Denzel. "Responsibility as an artist, as a public figure. But some people say you pick and choose when to speak out. Why is that?" The question wasn't overtly hostile, but it carried an edge. Denzel tilted his head slightly, considering his response. He spoke about timing, about intention, about the danger of speaking just to be heard rather than to say something meaningful. His answer was thoughtful, measured, the kind that usually ended debates rather than fueling them. For a moment, it seemed like the conversation would glide smoothly back into safer territory. But Piers wasn't finished. Still, he pressed, cutting in before Denzel could fully finish his thought. "There are critics who argue that silence, especially from someone with your influence, is a statement in itself." A flicker passed across Denzel's face, brief, almost imperceptible, but real. He shifted in his chair, uncrossing and recrossing his legs, maintaining composure. "I don't believe in noise for noise's sake," he replied calmly. "I believe in purpose. And I believe not every conversation needs to happen on someone else's terms." The studio grew quieter. Even the audience seemed to sense the shift, their reactions more restrained now, unsure whether to clap or simply listen. The crew exchanged glances behind the cameras. This was no longer just promotion, it was something more personal, more unpredictable. Piers leaned back, then forward again, clearly energized. "But isn't that a convenient position?" he asked. "To decide when it suits you to engage and when it doesn't." That was the moment the temperature rose. Denzel's smile faded, replaced by a look of serious focus. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't bristle. Instead, he met Piers, gaze head-on, his presence filling the space between them. "What's convenient," he said evenly, "is assuming you understand someone's principles without living their life." A low murmur rippled through the audience. Piers lifted his eyebrows, as if amused by the pushback. "I'm just asking the questions people at home are thinking," he said, the familiar defense rolling easily off his tongue. Denzel inhaled slowly, visibly steadying himself. "No," he replied, firmer now. "You're asking the questions you want answered, framed in a way that benefits the spectacle." The word spectacle hung in the air like smoke. For a split second, Piers looked genuinely surprised, then intrigued. He smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "So now it's a spectacle to challenge a Hollywood icon." Denzel leaned back slightly, hands resting on the arms of his chair, grounding himself. "It's a spectacle when the goal is confrontation instead of conversation," he said. "And I didn't come here for that." The tension was no longer subtle. It pressed against the walls, seeped into the corners of the room. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether to react. Somewhere off camera, a producer whispered urgently into a headset. The usual rhythm of television, question, answer, laugh, applause, had broken down completely. Piers glanced at his notes again, then looked up, clearly unwilling to let go. "With respect," he said, "you don't get to control how you're questioned when you come on a show like this." Denzel's jaw tightened, just slightly. "With respect," he replied, matching the phrase, "I do get to control whether I participate in a line of questioning that crosses into disrespect." Silence fell, not the kind filled with awkward coughs or nervous laughter, but a heavy, deliberate quiet. The cameras lingered a fraction too long on Denzel's face, capturing the resolve there. He wasn't angry. He was resolved, and that distinction made all the difference. For a brief moment, it seemed as if Piers might pivot, lighten the mood, crack a joke to reset the atmosphere. Instead, he leaned forward again, voice sharper now, determined. "Are you saying I've crossed a line?" Denzel didn't hesitate. "I'm saying the line is right there," he said, gesturing subtly between them, "and you're standing on it." The audience gasped softly, the sound spreading like a wave. The tension was no longer just simmering, it was boiling, threatening to spill over at any second. The studio lights continued to blaze, indifferent to the human drama unfolding beneath them, as the moment stretched on, heavy with consequence, signaling that whatever came next would not be easily undone. The silence lingered longer than anyone expected, stretching into an uncomfortable eternity where even the hum of studio equipment seemed louder than before. Piers Morgan straightened in his chair, lips pressed together, weighing his next move. This was the moment he lived for, the brink of confrontation, where an interview could turn into a viral spectacle. But Denzel Washington didn't blink. He remained standing now, his presence commanding without a single raised decibel, as if the room itself had shifted to accommodate him. Piers finally broke the quiet with a short, humorless laugh. "Well," he said, spreading his hands, "that's quite an accusation." Denzel nodded once, slowly. "It's not an accusation," he replied. "It's an observation." From behind the cameras, a producer's voice crackled through headsets, urging Piers to steer things back, to salvage the segment. The clock was ticking, commercial break loomed, but Piers, visibly irritated, waved it off with a subtle shake of his head. He leaned in again, determined not to lose control of the narrative. "So what?" he asked, tone sharper now, "you only want soft questions." Praise and applause. Denzel exhaled, not in frustration, but in disappointment. "I want honest dialogue," he said. "There's a difference between honesty and provocation. You know that." The audience shifted in their seats. Some nodded, others frowned, torn between admiration for Denzel's composure and curiosity about how far this would go. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every micro-expression, every tightening jaw, every flicker of tension that editors would later slow down and replay endlessly. Piers glanced briefly toward the control room, then back at Denzel. "You're being very sensitive for someone who's played some of the toughest characters in film," he remarked. That was the spark. Denzel's eyes hardened, not with anger, but with clarity. "Don't confuse my roles with my reality," he said. "Strength isn't about tolerating disrespect. It's about knowing when to walk away." A collective inhale swept through the studio. The words landed with finality. Denzel reached down, picked up the jacket draped over the back of his chair, and slipped it on with deliberate calm. The simple action sent a shockwave through the room. This wasn't a threat, it was a decision. Piers stood abruptly. "Hold on," he said, forcing a smile that couldn't hide the frustration beneath it. "We're not done here." Denzel met his gaze one last time. "I am," he replied. Security moved in cautiously, not to restrain him, but to escort, their presence a silent acknowledgement that the situation had passed the point of recovery. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or remain silent. A few clapped hesitantly, then more joined in, the sound growing until it filled the studio, an unscripted reaction, raw and divided. As Denzel walked off stage, he didn't look back. The cameras followed him for a beat too long before cutting to a wide shot of Piers standing alone, jaw clenched, hands gripping the edge of his desk. The broadcast abruptly went to commercial, the screen fading out as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. But outside the studio, the moment exploded. Within minutes, clips surfaced online, some cropped, some slowed down, some overlaid with dramatic music. Headlines appeared, each more sensational than the last. Denzel Washington storms off, interview gone wrong, line crossed on live TV. Comment sections ignited with debate. Some praised Denzel for standing his ground, calling it a masterclass in dignity. Others accused him of avoiding tough questions, of letting ego get in the way of discourse. Backstage, Denzel moved with quiet purpose, greeting crew members who looked at him with a mix of respect and awe. A few thanked him softly. Others simply nodded, unsure what to say. He paused briefly near the exit, taking a deep breath, the noise of the studio fading behind him. For him, the moment was already over. The choice had been made, and he stood by it. Inside the control room, producers scrambled. Piers paced back and forth, loosening his tie, replaying the exchange in his mind. He was angry, yes, but also keenly aware of what had just happened. Controversy meant ratings. Ratings meant attention. Still, there was an undeniable sting in being the one left standing alone. When the show returned from commercial, Piers addressed the audience with practiced composure. He spoke about spirited debate and strong personalities, framing the incident as a clash of viewpoints rather than a breakdown of respect. But his voice lacked its usual confidence. Viewers noticed. Social media noticed. By the next morning, the moment had taken on a life of its own. Morning shows dissected it frame by frame. Late-night hosts joked about it. Commentators argued over who was right, who was wrong, and what it all meant about media, fame, and boundaries. Hashtags trended globally. Everyone had an opinion. Denzel, meanwhile, remained silent. No tweets, no statements, no interviews explaining his side. That silence only amplified the conversation. Fans interpreted it as grace. Critics saw it as avoidance. But those who knew him best understood, it was consistency. He had said what he needed to say, when it mattered most. Days later, at a film premiere, a reporter cautiously asked him about the incident. Denzel smiled politely and said, "I believe in conversations that build, not ones that tear down." Then he moved on, leaving the question hanging in the air. The moment faded eventually, as all viral storms do, replaced by the next outrage, the next clip, the next argument. But for many who watched it live, something lingered. Not the confrontation itself, but the quiet power of a man who chose self-respect over spectacle. And long after the cameras stopped rolling, that choice echoed louder than any argument ever could.